tal? ¿Cómo les va? Bienvenidos a una emisión más de Inventario, la agenda cultural de los universitarios. Y el día de hoy haremos un recorrido por los pasillos de San Ildefonso, conociendo la obra del artista sueco Johan Falk.
Él es representante del expresionismo abstracto. Su obra está íntimamente ligada a la de Orozco, de Siqueiros, de Rivera. Él también es muralista, pero por primera vez en México se presenta aquí su obra de Caballete.
Son 90 retratos que conforman esta exposición titulada La alteridad en el espejo y muestran la mirada de este artista que se ha caracterizado por reactualizar el género del retrato.
Vamos a conocer estas obras y recorrer estos pasillos de la mano precisamente de Johan Falk.
Well, I've always been, ever since I was a small child, interested in portraiture. The first drawing or painting I did was actually a copy of Frans Hals. And I just love the drama and this kind of exaggeration of the personality, the essence, what a person represents. And so it's been with me all my life. Well, ever since I first started to study art at Pratt Institute.
Desde que comencé a estudiar arte en el Pratt Institute de Nueva York, fantaseaba con algún día hacer una especie de gabinete de pinturas o exposición, dedicada en su totalidad a los médicos. Cuando estudiaba anatomía artística en el Pratt Institute, tomábamos clases en la Universidad de Nueva York. Y los médicos que nos enseñaban anatomía tenían características peculiares. Eran delgados, de caras alargadas, severos, un tanto fríos y distantes, de dedos alargados y manos venosas. Eran fumadores y vestían batas blancas. Nos daban clases usando cuerpos que colocaban frente a ellos en el laboratorio.
And all of this in this old auditorium created a very eerie, special feeling that attracted and appealed to me. And so already when I was 21 years old, I had this fantasy of one day painting a whole collection of doctors. And then finally, when I came back to Sweden in 1999, I started to develop.
Empecé a trabajar en idea. En 2003 comencé con los primeros estudios y dibujos de médicos, de donde resultaron 75 pinturas, y terminé en 2005, cuando se llevó a cabo una gran exposición.
I think there's a big difference when artists first starting to depict doctors during the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, for example, who had an obsession with autopsies, etc. And then when during the Baroque period, when Frans Hals, for example, started to paint autopsies that were performed in front of an audience, they were fascinated by a new science. Like I said before, everything was not up to God anymore, it was up to man, and this fascinated people. During the early Renaissance, it was forbidden to perform autopsies. It was considered a great sin. But then during the Baroque period, for example, science was something interesting. And so the medical portraits became a symbol of the interest of the new way of thinking and the new way of viewing man. But when I started making my portraits, medical science was not something new. It isn't something new to us. It's a part of our everyday life. What I was interested in was the psychology of the doctors. Who is behind the robe? Who are these people? These highly elevated academic characters. How do they think? What do they communicate? That's what I was looking for. This composition actually derives from the early Christian way of telling the biblical stories. And most of you have seen images in old churches here in Mexico or in Europe where the angels, for example, the archangels or the Holy Family are depicted in a kind of a cluster of people like this. And Diego Rivera used that a lot in his murals, and I think it's so fascinating and beautiful because it elevates man in a fantastic way. And this also relates to the rigidity of that old photograph. People who take themselves seriously for a good reason because they've devoted their life to a craft or to a science, like these doctors, for example, who work with child cancer. And I think that their way of holding themselves, being so relaxed but at the same time stern, because they view themselves as important, which they are. I think that is moving and beautiful. And Diego Rivera, I think, used those compositions to emanate the same thing, namely love for life, love for man, to elevate man, to make him worthy and dignified. And so this composition is very strongly related to the Christian way of depicting man and the way that Diego Rivera altered that way of depicting man. And here is one example of how I have chosen to depict the medical doctor. So it's a fusion of three very strong factors. Well, for me, since I had my atelier in this Museum of Antiquity,
En lo personal, como tengo mi taller en el Museo de Antigüedades, estas esculturas representan la tradición de la historia occidental. De cierto modo, también le da un toque político a los retratos, pues creo que el predominio de la cultura es de gran importancia. Creo que la pintura, la composición musical o la creación teatral son inútiles si no se desarrollan dentro del contexto de nuestra cultura. La civilización occidental se origina en la antigüedad griega, romana, así que para mí era importante incluir algunas de esas esculturas en el fondo. Además, la medicina como profesión y las nuevas ciencias médicas son resultado directo de la forma occidental de ver al hombre, donde la vida, el hombre mismo, es lo más importante. Entonces creí que incluir esas esculturas en las pinturas era una forma política de opinar sobre la ciencia médica. No soy un retratista convencional. No pinto como el clásico artista de retratos por comisión. El estilo expresionista y su visión del hombre tienen una gran influencia en mí. Considero que el retrato debe ser arte, de lo contrario no tiene sentido. E incluso puede volverse aburrido si no se le ve como arte. De hecho, la representación exacta de alguien no es interesante.
You want to capture something else, and that's the essence of the person, or what that person represents. You can also play with different parts of what a person would like to be, which is also very, very interesting. And that emanates from each person, his or her ambitions. And then you have to treat the painting in itself in a way that you communicate this kind of posture of the person. So I view myself as an expressionist, modern portrait painter, not traditional. But I focus on the psychology of the sitter, and
Más bien me enfoco en el aspecto psicológico del modelo. Es por ello que soy precavido al elegir a la gente que retrato, porque quiero que su lado psicológico o su personaje refleje una actitud, lo que le da al retrato un tono político. Sí considero que mis retratos están muy ligados a algunos muralistas, por ejemplo a Pablo O'Higgins, aunque su objetivo político fuera distinto. Pero para mí es muy interesante usar a individuos como una especie de radios o transmisores de una idea o quizás de un punto de vista político.
It took many years to arrive at this point. It's also a style that I really had to fight for. The same way that the German artists in the late 19th century had to really fight for a new way of painting, an extreme way of handling color and the treatment of the surface of the canvas. You still have to fight.
Hoy en día también es necesario luchar porque hay quienes quieren un retrato al pastel y verse bien, agradables, porque así desean mostrarse, pero tal vez no son agradables. Creo que nadie debería ser retratado como alguien agradable o simpático o como un conformista. Uno debe representar algo y ser uno mismo, pero al pintar de forma convencional se termina haciéndolo por agradar y complacer al que mira el retrato o a quien posa para él. De cierto modo, cuando tienes a dos personas juntas, por ejemplo, yo, el pintor, y el modelo, el sujeto, se juegan dos roles. Todos adoptamos varios roles en la vida. Por ejemplo, una mujer aristócrata tiene un rol con el que interpreta a cierto personaje dentro de la sociedad. El representante sindical simboliza algo, interpreta un papel. El médico también actúa. No es solo la individualidad lo que define quién eres, sino también lo que quieres ser y en lo que te has esforzado en ser. Yo, como artista, también he adoptado un papel y me desenvuelvo en el rol que interpreto. Ahora mismo interpreto al artista, al pintor, al retratista y seguiré haciéndolo las próximas 3 o 4 décadas hasta que muera y alguien más tome mi lugar. Son muchas cosas, pero todos actuamos. Lo mismo hace el modelo. Una vez que estamos juntos, conformamos un teatro, porque todos deseamos adoptar un personaje. Quiero que el modelo sienta confianza en mí, porque voy a retratarlo. Y eso le provoca nerviosismo y temor, pues desconoce cómo resultará todo. Y a mí también me provoca lo mismo, porque quiero cumplir lo que represento. Quiero hacer una buena pintura que tenga un sentido. Y si no lo logro, vuelvo a donde comencé.
Is that I will not be able to perform or do what I have a reputation of being good at doing. So of course it's a theater play. I play my role, the sitter plays his or her role, and if that moment is successful, something magical can come out of it. There's a silence, concentration. All of a sudden you reach a point within a person that communicates for real. And then something very interesting happens, because your individuality, your soul, your inside, your alter ego is fused with what you represent in society. And it's the same for me. My inner intentions that I may not be aware of is allowed to perform on the canvas. And then a good painting can develop. But you can never say, oh, today I'm going to create a great masterpiece. That's impossible to say. You can never say, I will do a good painting today. You cannot demand those wonderful moments of communication.
A menudo elijo a alguien y luego los obligo a encargar un retrato. Solo bromeo. Sí, me hacen muchos encargos, claro, pero muy a menudo contacto a la gente y les pido que me permitan retratarlos. Es común que le escriba a la gente que me fascina o interesa, pidiéndoles que me dejen pintar un retrato de ellos, y 9 de cada 10 personas acceden a hacerlo. Creo que cuando se actúa o se interpreta un papel, un rol de género, de identidad, de clase o cualquier otro, también se experimenta con la identidad.
I think that you're also experimenting with identity. And for example, for a man to dress up like a woman, it's very, very interesting, because it questions your whole formal being, right? And so to play with those roles, like I do in my portraits, I allow people to act their part in society, if you understand what I mean.
Si hablamos de interpretar un papel y de un punto de vista político, le pedí a un famoso actor sueco llamado Henry Hollenberg que interpretara el personaje de Hitler para uno de mis retratos. Y de hecho, 10 años antes ya lo había interpretado en una obra llamada Spear.
And when I saw the German film The Last Days of Hitler, where Bruno Ganz played this character, I was so fascinated because it was the first time that I saw somebody trying to actually show the person who was Hitler, not only the type. And so I said, perhaps it's possible to paint this character or type as a person, because after all, we live in the aftermath of the craziness that this man created, the Second World War, the destruction of Europe, the Holocaust, etc., etc. So I was thinking, maybe I can have an actor play the part of Hitler in a portrait, and at the same time being himself, engaging in this role, and so create a fusion between two characters, the actor being a actor, a type, which it is, playing Hitler, who was also a type, but also a person, of course, with a certain kind of psychology or whatever. And I wanted to depict the person via the actor. And so that was really a multiple play of identities. So I think that, and that is also a political commentary, because this person came to color my entire childhood. We grew up in the aftermath of the Second World War, and everything was kind of a reflection of what had happened 20 years earlier. So to me it was very fascinating to be able to once again create this fusion of identities within one portrait, and also making a kind of a gloomy, eerie political comment, if you can use psychology as a political comment. So when I was acting as a cabaret star in the nightclubs of New York,
cuando trabajaba como estrella de cabaret en los clubs nocturnos de Nueva York, podía jugar libremente con esos diversos roles: el de hombre, el de mujer, el de un ser decadente y aterrador, el de un ser con personalidad draculesca, o el de un dandy, entre muchos otros roles de género que adoptaba. Y eso también es evidente en mis retratos, porque del mismo modo en que exageraba mis personajes, cuando trabajaba en Nueva York a principios de los 90, así también exagero los personajes de los sujetos que retrato, y lo que representan e interpretan. Me fascinan, por ejemplo, las mujeres aristócratas. Creo que no soy como ellas. Yo no tengo esa especie de esa precisión casi militar en la forma de ser, de hablar, como podemos verlo en muchas mujeres de sociedad en México, por ejemplo. Esa forma de contenerse, de ser, en cierto modo, perfectas, como se enseña a los viejos actores en las escuelas de drama, la forma de comportarse, de pararse, de mirar alrededor, de conversar. Eso me fascina. Creo que cuando contemplas a alguien que adopta ese tipo de estructura, que es de alguna forma una actuación, pues interpreta un papel, cuando observas a ese individuo y cómo mezcla su rol con su personalidad real, con el sujeto real que desea algo, que lucha por algo, ves algo muy bello. Podría quizás llegar a envidiar esos lujos personales porque creo que son bellos, aunque soy muy caótico para ello. No puedo ser de ese modo, pero me fascinan y me encanta exagerarlo y representarlo. No generalizo o ridiculizo como lo hace Orozco en esta magnífica obra, sino que trato de resaltar algo más que considero positivo y muy interesante, además de inspirador.
very interesting and also inspiring.
Entonces, pensar en tales personas como defensores de una sociedad o de un sentimiento o un tipo de comportamiento me fascina.
Sentiment or way of being, it fascinates me. I'm very influenced by the Mexican muralists, especially Siqueiros. I love Orozco, but perhaps his painterly style is not predominantly what has influenced me. But both Rivera and Siqueiros and Pablo O'Higgins have been great sources of inspiration for me. I would say the portraits of Pablo O'Higgins have been and are very important to me. I think that he had a marvelous way of combining social concern and his strong leftist political views into his portrait in a marvelous way. Orozco is an artist that fascinates me a lot, as I guess he does with a lot of Mexicans. However, I have not experienced the social traumas that he did. I have not experienced the class or race conflicts that he grew up in the aftermath of the Civil War. I have not experienced his frustration and anger. So I cannot paint from that point of view or perspective, and it would be pretentious to even try to do so. I must look at something else. And I think it's so important to, even though you're extremely different from a predecessor, you must take his or her work into regard so that you have an art historical continuation that is visible in your own work. Otherwise, I think that art is pointless. It's as much of a tradition as literature and music is. And now if we look at, for example, this magnificent piece of Orozco, where he is depicting the aristocrats, as he calls them, ridiculing these women, in a way ridiculing, but at the same time, these women were so strong that they don't really allow him to diminish their power. These are powerful women, no matter how cruel and selfish and unconcerned they may be. They're trampling on the people, they're moving forwards. This is a very strong political piece, and I love it. I think it's very interesting when you look at some of Diego Rivera's murals, when he, for example, was depicting the upper classes and questioning their right to have the power or the money that they had. In these very strong social commentaries, he would use friends sometimes as models who belonged to society, and they would gladly model for him. He also painted some beautiful portraits of men and women belonging to society. And this, of course, must have been the result of a fascination and a love for these people. You cannot paint a portrait of somebody that you dislike. It's impossible, unless you are consciously ridiculing the person. But that is not a situation that will work for long. But so Diego Rivera had that kind of personality, that a kind of loving personality, I guess. So he could embrace even the people that he was actually questioning. And I think it's so interesting to see, for example, this mural, The Night of the Rich, where he used friends to pose for these figures that he was questioning at the same time. It's a very interesting way of working, I think. It's about 90 portraits.
La muestra consta de casi 90 retratos. Estos en particular fueron hechos entre 2004 y 2010. Algunos de ellos formaron parte de una gran exposición en Suecia en 2006, llamada El rostro de la medicina, que incluía 70 pinturas mías de médicos y profesores de medicina. Para mí es un gran honor, es fantástico, casi irreal, sobre todo porque en los últimos 6 años he tenido a los muralistas mexicanos como mi fuente principal de inspiración cuando hago murales en Suecia. Es increíble, fascinante y maravilloso, es demasiado a decir verdad.
Esperamos que hayan disfrutado el recorrido por la obra de este estupendo artista sueco. Él dice que el retrato es la manifestación más esencial del arte porque somos seres humanos vistos por seres humanos.
No hay que perdernos la posibilidad de conocer esta propuesta. Esta exposición está vigente solamente hasta el 15 de julio ahí en el antiguo colegio de San Ildefonso.
Y con esto nos despedimos. Nos vemos la próxima semana aquí en Inventario.
Adiós.
Chao.